Hello, everybody. David here. Welcome. Here we share true stories from real people. Today, starting out with the first story. My cousin accused me of something terrible, and I was thrown out of the house. Years later, she confessed as she was dying, but to me, it was still not enough. Hello, everyone. I'm 36 years old, and I have a difficult problem to share with you. I'm not sure how I feel, maybe incredibly lonely. I have nowhere else to turn. I'm an avid reader here and feel this is the best place to share my story. I would greatly appreciate any advice I can get. There's a lot of background that needs to be discussed, so this will be a long post. First, let me tell you about my cousin, Sabrina, 35 years old. She's the worst kind of trash I've ever known. I know it sounds harsh and cold to talk about my cousin like this, but when it comes to Sabrina, it's the truth. Then there are my parents, both 65, just as bad, which I'll get into later. I tried to understand Sabrina as we grew up, studying psychology and why people do terrible things to others. But in the end, I could never forgive her, and to this day, I still despise my entire family. Sure, Sabrina had a rough childhood. As a kid, my uncle, Sabrina's father, my dad's brother, was the black sheep of the family. He was an abuser. He drank, smoked all day and never worked. And if that wasn't enough, he abused Sabrina. Her mother wasn't much better. I understand the power of trauma on a person, especially when they're abused at such a young, vulnerable age. However, as human beings, it's our responsibility to overcome psychological damage so as not to inflict the same pain we've endured on those around us. Unfortunately, Sabrina never learned this, and became very much like her parents in many ways. My parents were well aware of Sabrina's home life, so they were always incredibly protective of her. Sometimes they tried to intervene, even calling Child Protective Services to report my aunt and uncle. But whenever the authorities showed up, Sabrina's parents always managed to weasel their way out of it. Then one day, Sabrina's parents had an accident. They were driving with quite a bit of alcohol in their system, crashed into another car, and died. Sabrina was left orphaned, which was understandably a traumatic experience, even if her parents were as bad as they were. Rather than letting Sabrina get pulled into the foster care system, my parents stepped in and took her in as their own. Although I hadn't spent much time with Sabrina, despite our families having plenty of interactions, and even though all my interactions with her as a child were pretty unpleasant, I was initially excited about the idea of having a sister at home. Sure, she was only a year younger than me, but I often felt lonely as an only child and was excited to have someone to play with. If only I had known the huge turning point this moment would be in my life, I would have begged my parents to send Sabrina to Siberia, as that place is as cold as my cousin's heart. My parents weren't perfect themselves. They drank too much, didn't save much money, but they worked hard to provide for me. They did their best to support me. But from a young age, I overheard my mom complaining to her friends about how she had always wanted a daughter instead of a son. She didn't know I was in the next room listening. But even as a child, I understood those words, and they cut like a knife. As soon as Sabrina moved in, my parents acted as if I didn't exist. I was always a clumsy, introverted kid, and I guess that disappointed my traditionally minded parents. My dad was the captain of the football team in high school, and I couldn't even throw a ball without tripping over my shoelaces. I was awkward and always felt uncomfortable around girls. My dad had been a ladies' man in his youth, flirting with everyone in town before settling down with my mom. Meanwhile, no matter what, I couldn't get a girl to like me. My parents always told me I needed to toughen up, saying I was weak. So my self-esteem was already low, and when Sabrina came along, it completely shattered. My parents adored Sabrina and admired everything she did. If she drew a picture, it would be proudly displayed on the fridge, even if it looked like garbage. If I drew a picture, it would get a quick glance and be set aside. Sabrina got praised by my parents for getting a B in class. Meanwhile, I got straight A's and never heard them say they were proud of me. Sabrina had the best birthday parties, the best Christmas presents, and when Sabrina started attending school with me, my social life simply nosedived. She might have been a year below me in school, but she made it her mission to make my life a living hell. I was a clumsy bookworm, while Sabrina was a pretty, outgoing girl who loved to talk and socialize. She was immediately accepted into the popular crowd, the jocks and cheerleaders. These were the people who loved to torment me, and Sabrina jumped right in, like a fish in water. Her boyfriend was the football team captain and my biggest bully. He and his jerk friends would do cruel things to me, like giving me wedgies and other humiliating tortures. No matter how much I tried to avoid them, I got beaten up every day. Sabrina never once stood up for me. Instead, she'd stand by smiling or sometimes outright laughing at my pain. I'm not joking when I say Sabrina was always a killer. As if it wasn't enough to make my school life a wave of endless torment and anguish, Sabrina was determined to make my home life even worse. I felt like I was living in a prison, only to be tortured again the next day at school. I never got a break. The mental damage this period of my life caused cannot be overstated. It's the pain that changed me forever and scarred me for life due to all the abuse I had to endure. I tried telling my parents about Sabrina's friends bullying me at school, but they said it was nothing and even mocked me for not being man enough to take a joke. They said only boys could be boys. My dad always told me I needed to be more of a man if I didn't want to be bullied. They saw me with black eyes and bruises, but they had no sympathy for me. Sabrina would stand by and laugh loudly during these discussions. Moreover, Sabrina was constantly making up lies about me. She'd break things around the house and tell my parents I did it. She'd cry and tell my parents I hit her. Sometimes she made me think I was losing my mind. She was such a skilled manipulator that she could almost make you wonder if you actually did what she was lying about. Of course, my parents believed every word she said. I can't count how many times I was punished for something she clearly made up. This gradually wore down my mind, making me feel inferior, like I had no worth. As time went on, I became more depressed and my grades began to slip. They still remained higher than Sabrina's, but my parents still punished me for the slight drop, which only added to my depression and sense of worthlessness. Because of my unfortunate grade drop, I couldn't get into the college I wanted. I was stuck in this town, in this house. I had to attend the local community college, but I quickly studied hard to get my engineering degree. I wanted to succeed and get as far away from my horrible family as possible. Sabrina had no plans for her future. She didn't even graduate. She dropped out during her senior year and slept with almost every guy in town, or at least it seemed that way because I always saw her with someone new. She started partying constantly and hanging out. She also got involved in drugs. My parents constantly took care of her and made excuses for her. The way she acted seemed wrong, but they were too lenient with Sabrina, giving her little to no motivation to change her ways. I was still living at home during this time, and Sabrina's abuse of me only worsened. I remember one afternoon when she was having a party at the house with her then boyfriend. I was trying to study for an exam, so I asked them to turn down the music. My tone was polite and kind, but Sabrina and her boyfriend took my request as an insult. Sabrina told her boyfriend to beat me up, and the guy did. He hit me so hard that I had to call the police. I ended up in the hospital because of the injury, but my parents and Sabrina told me I overreacted. They even convinced me not to press charges against that idiot. Looking back, I should have sued them all. Then came that fateful day when I was 21. It changed my life forever. You see, Sabrina could never stand not being the center of attention. Everything had to revolve around her. She acted like she was the center of the universe, and whenever something went wrong in her personal life, she would blame others. Besides, you can imagine that she made such terrible decisions that she got pregnant by one of her boyfriends, which I'll get into later. Sure, she was often cruel and unfair to my parents, especially considering all the good they'd done for her over the years, but Sabrina's first target whenever something went wrong in her life was always me. Sabrina had recently been dumped by another boyfriend. I guess this particular guy must have meant something to her in her damaged, immature mind, and she was especially distraught and upset when he left her. Sabrina wasn't good at choosing the best types of men either. To complicate matters, the boyfriend who had just left Sabrina happened to be the father of her son, Tyron. She struggled to take care of him properly, and most of the parenting responsibilities fell on me and my parents. It was an unpleasant scenario, and I wasn't happy about it at all. Sabrina had recently been particularly bitter and rude, despite all of us helping her so much without asking for anything in return, as taking care of a child is no easy task, especially when the mother does very little for him. Right before the event that would change my life forever, Sabrina and I had an argument. This was an everyday occurrence. We always argued, and things often got pretty heated, so I didn't think much of it, but during the argument I grew tired of Sabrina's constant belittling. She called me an ugly loser, a pathetic virgin. She kept abusing me, and I'd had enough. I exploded and told her she would always be dumped by every man she dated because she was worthless. She seemed furious and stormed off like a child. I didn't think much about the comment, but I guess Sabrina took it personally. One day I was busy with my work when suddenly my parents literally kicked down my bedroom door. I was a little scared because I didn't expect them to barge into my room like that, so I asked them what was going on. My parents and even some other family members barged into my room. Needless to say, I was even more confused as the seconds passed. I saw Sabrina walk in, crying, looking inconsolable, but I knew it was just an act. I had a terrible feeling about what was coming, and my suspicion was truly terrifying. That's when Sabrina dropped a bombshell on me as she said, "There he is, he's the one who assaulted me." My jaw dropped. I couldn't believe she was accusing me of that. I immediately thought of the argument we had a few days before. I asked her if that was why she was doing this, and my dad immediately stepped in and told me to shut up and not make excuses anymore. I kept denying the accusations, and then the beatings began. My entire family started beating me. It was brutal, much worse than the countless beatings I'd endured at school. They bluntly told me to pack my things and leave immediately, and reminded me that I should feel lucky they weren't reporting me to the authorities. I wanted to defend my innocence again, but they told me to shut up. My entire family had just disowned me based on the word of that spoiled, wicked girl Sabrina. It was the worst day of my life. At first it was tough because I had nowhere to go. I had some savings, but it only got me a tiny room. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs and studied full-time, and eventually I saved enough money to get my own place. I did it all on my own, with no support from anyone but myself. Now I'm 36 years old, and I haven't spoken to my family since that fateful day when they beat me and disowned me. But today, I'm faced with a new dilemma. Today I got a call from Sabrina. It was from my parents' phone number. I guess Sabrina still lives with them, though it's been years since we last spoke. I immediately recognized her voice and froze. Even hearing Sabrina's voice was a trigger for my trauma. Yet Sabrina spoke in a different tone. I asked her why she was calling. She asked how I'd been, something she'd never asked me before, then explained that she was dying of terminal cancer. I said nothing. She then told me she's a single mother. Tyron is now 17, and she has another son named Phil, 14. She mentioned she's divorced, and her ex-husband is in prison. Then she apologized and told me God was punishing her for making up lies about me. She begged for my forgiveness. I told her I needed time to think and hung up. My heart was pounding. Right after the call, she sent me a message detailing everything. She reiterated that she was so sorry for everything. She lamented that her 2 children would grow up without a mother, and pointed out the sad truth that she had been a terrible person her whole life. I haven't replied to the message yet. I'm torn on how to respond. Should I forgive Sabrina? I must admit, I still hate her with all my heart. Please let me know what you think. Update 1. I received a lot of helpful advice. Some people say I should let it go and show forgiveness. I understand the point that harboring hate for someone is simply a mental burden. However, others explained that Sabrina's terminal illness isn't a reason to forgive what she did. My family is likely still as toxic as ever. So, after careful consideration, I've made my decision. This may disappoint some of you, but I chose the path of revenge. I found Sabrina's Facebook page and easily found Phil and Tyrone in her friends list. I sent them screenshots of Sabrina's confession. Then I tracked down Sabrina's ex-husband, who, despite being in prison, still has a Facebook account. I went down the list and sent the confession to my parents and other family members. I wanted everyone to know that Sabrina was a huge piece of trash, and I think the world would be better off flushing her down the toilet. I know this won't end well, but at least I feel better. Update 2. Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, do I have an update for you all? Can you believe my parents dared to call me today with a bunch of nonsense? I know it's been 15 years since we last spoke, but honestly, I'm not in a hurry to talk to my parents again. I should have known they'd try to contact me after I dropped the bomb on them about their golden child Sabrina yesterday. Surprisingly, the people I once called my parents initially apologized to me. They admitted they were wrong to kick me out based solely on Sabrina's word without hearing my side of the story. I reminded them that they'd always done that, even before that incident. I guess my parents hoped I'd be happier hearing their apology, so they glossed over that comment and immediately brought up Sabrina's cancer. They told me I was wrong to involve Sabrina's children and ex-husband, saying I should have waited a bit longer before telling the family about it. I bluntly told them I didn't care. I told them both that they should have thought about all that before they kicked me out and ruined my life, and I reminded them that they conveniently skipped over the part where the entire family beat me up without even listening to what I had to say. I was furious and hung up, hoping I'd never hear from them again. Update 3. Hello, wonderful people. Today is a beautiful day. I received some great news and wanted to stop by to share it with you all. Today I received another call from my parents. I hesitated to answer, but then I thought they'd only call if something important happened, so I picked up. My parents were crying uncontrollably. They told me Sabrina had passed away that morning. Oh, it's only been 3 weeks since she confessed her guilt to me, and now she's gone. I must admit I seemed cold and unfeeling, but I felt nothing when I heard the news. My parents asked why I wasn't saying anything when I hadn't responded to the news for a while, and I told them I simply didn't care. They told me it was heartless and cruel to say such things about my own cousin, but I reminded my parents that they were the ones who abandoned their only child. I heard them start to protest as they began to yell and berate me, but I wasn't in the mood to tolerate their nonsense, so I hung up just like before. Sabrina is dead, which is fine with me because at least now she won't be around to bother me, but I feel like my family doesn't fully understand the situation, to put it mildly. I think some people need to learn a lesson. I don't want to come off as cruel here, but I think more revenge is needed for my family to truly get the message. So I've decided I'm going to plan something for my family. In fact, I already have a plan and we'll be back soon to explain the details to you all because today, I don't have much time, and I just wanted to stop by to share the update about Sabrina's death. Update 4. Hello everyone, I have another update for you. Today was amazing. Everything went according to plan. I'll get straight to the point and explain all the details. It wasn't hard to find out the details of Sabrina's funeral. I was surprised they were even holding a funeral for that disgusting woman, as I'm not sure who would want to attend, but I found the details online and prepared. I even rented a tuxedo that looked great at the funeral. I wasn't invited to the funeral, so I decided to invite myself and give my old family a surprise visit. I wasn't sure if anyone would recognize me since it had been 15 years since those idiots last saw me. No one cared to ask how I was doing. I arrived at the funeral, and the service had already started by the time I walked through the church doors. There was a crowd gathered, which surprised me because you know what I think of her. But this worked out better for my plan, as it just gave me a larger audience for the little show I had prepared for everyone. When it was time for people to say a few words about the deceased, I stepped up to the podium. I heard someone whisper, "It's him," as if the only thing that stood out about me was her lie. That's when I began my speech. It was basically the speech I had prepared on a piece of paper, where I exposed all the abuse I endured from Sabrina and the rest of the family. I exposed Sabrina for every nasty, cruel thing she ever did to me, and I didn't care if her children were watching. They needed to know their mother was a wicked woman. I also recounted how the family turned their backs on me when Sabrina falsely accused me. My dad stood up and told me to shut up and leave. He said I was ruining the entire funeral, and no one in the whole building wanted to hear me lie about Sabrina. They were still defending that trash, even after knowing the truth about her. My dad threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. I'm not a violent person, but I was ready and willing to fight this old man. That's when Phil and Tyrone stood up and spoke. No one had asked what they thought about all of this. Well, Phil and Tyrone confirmed everything I said about Sabrina. They said Sabrina neglected them, abused them, and spent all their money on drugs and alcohol. There was an uproar in the funeral home, and I could see the family was very upset. I guess this information hit them differently, coming from Sabrina's own children rather than from me, the black sheep of the family. I let them mutter and argue with each other. I'd said what I needed to say and was done with that trash family. I walked out of the funeral and back to my apartment. That was my revenge. Maybe it wasn't enough, but it made me feel a little better about myself after years of torment. Update 5. Hello, everyone. I'm here with the final update for you all. I just wanted to let you know that I wouldn't have survived without Reddit's support and all the great advice I got from many of you. The purpose of this update is that I want to share some more details about what happened to my parents and Sabrina's children after all this time. After everything that happened, I learned more details about my parents' lives. It turns out that after they abandoned me and treated me in the cruelest way possible, their lives weren't exactly a bed of roses. My father, once a drinker, eventually became an alcoholic, fell into ruin, and ended up financially bankrupt. He lost his job, and his health deteriorated rapidly due to alcohol abuse. On the other hand, my mother found herself lonely and bitter. She felt a bit bad for messing things up with her only son, especially when she realized there would be no one to take care of her in her old age, especially after Sabrina's death. Although if she had lived, I don't think Sabrina would have taken care of my parents either. I learned all this from some relatives who contacted me after the service, though I'm not sure I believe them, but I don't care either. As for Sabrina's children, Phil and Tyrone, after their mother's death, they fell on hard times. Though she abused them for years, they still felt lost without her presence. They are currently living with my parents, which I don't think is a good idea for them. I wish I could do something for them, but I'm not sure I want to be involved with that family. Update 6. I'm back with another update, which I think will be the final one. As with Sabrina's death, my life no longer has many issues. To let you know that I finally took in Phil and Tyrone. After contacting me, they felt relieved to hear me speak at the funeral and speak some harsh truths. They didn't want anything to do with the rest of the family, and they had nowhere else to go after Sabrina's death since their father was in prison. My parents also weren't treating the boys well, as in their eyes, both boys disrespected their late mother and disgraced the family, as if they belonged to some kind of royal family. So I did the right thing and took them in. We live far away from the rest of the family, and we're living a great life. Phil and Tyrone don't act like their mother at all, and I'm proud to see them becoming fine young men,